The story today comes from the Reddit user 10 Minute Horror. When I was a kid, I found a treehouse that created another version of me. My best friend Lewis and I were biking our usual paths through the woods, like we did every Saturday of the summer. But this time, there was a new path that forked off from the other. It went into thick woods that we'd never explored because of the density of the trees. But then, all of a sudden, there was a new bike trail. Lewis and I decided to double back and check it out. The path was clear and wide for the first several hundred meters, but it started narrowing, and more roots were taking over the trail. Just as we were about to turn back, we saw a clearing ahead, and something large hovering a dozen feet up. As we got closer, it became clear that we were looking at a treehouse, a very well put together one. It was a wooden spiral staircase that led up to a wide, octagon-shaped structure with cut-out windows. It was unlike anything we'd ever seen. Lewis and I approached it cautiously, figuring there was someone or someone's inside. Lewis, who was braver and more adventurous, called out loudly with a simple, "Hello!" There was no response. No voice or shift in movement or floorboard squeaking. It was empty. Lewis was off his bike first and moved closer to the treehouse. I joined him inspecting the impressive structure. But that wasn't close enough for Lewis, and before I knew it, he was halfway up the spiral stairs, and I was following. Inside, there was a wide open space. The walls were covered with shelves filled with books and photographs. There were clothes hanging from the hooks and folded into dressers. There were no people, though. There was just Lewis and I. Lewis noticed it first. I saw his eyes go wide as he looked around. The books, the photographs, and clothes became familiar. I approached one of the walls. I was in all of the photos. The books were the same ones that lined the shelves in my room, as were the clothes hanging from hooks and folded in dressers. On the other side of the treehouse, Lewis was staring at his photos, at his books and clothes. We backed up into each other in the middle of the room. I was the first one to say it is time to leave, but Lewis was already making his way to the trapdoor down that led to the staircase. Only the trapdoor was no longer there. It was on the opposite side of the room. We climbed down the staircase to where we left our bikes, but they were gone. They weren't on the other side of the tree, or tipped over nearby. It simply disappeared, or been taken. This posed a serious problem because of how deep we were in the woods. Not only we were on an unknown path, but the afternoon sun had vanished. We did another look around, unbelieving that someone somehow had stolen our bikes while we were in the treehouse for all of 2 minutes. But that's what it looked like. That's what it looked like it happened. Still, we couldn't explain the contents of the treehouse, and at the moment, we weren't trying to. We started our way back down the trail on foot, but it was winding and curving more than on the way in. It took us an hour to get back to the main path. It took us another half hour to get out of the park and back to the entrance. From there, we had to split up as we lived in different directions. We were both already late for dinner and knew our parents were going to be pissed. So we said our goodbyes and took off. It took me another 45 minutes to walk home, and when I finally got there, I saw something that shook me to my core. My bike was chained up in its normal place along the side of the house. I walked up to it and inspected it. The chain was looped through the front wheel and the spokes, just as I always did it. I started doubting whether or not I even brought it on the ride, if somehow I'd imagined everything. But as I walked past the dining room window on the way to the front door, I saw something more disturbing than the bike. I saw me. I was sitting at the table with my family, only it wasn't me. The version of me at the table looked like I'd been flipped. My hair was split and combed over on the right side as opposed to the left, and I was using my left hand to eat with my fork instead of my right. I watched the mirror version of me eating and interacting with my family, smiling, laughing, talking. He fit in perfectly, almost. Then he locked eyes with me, and the smile disappeared, only for a moment. But in that moment I saw hatred and anger. Then it was gone, and he rejoined the conversation. I watched my mirror version stealthily slide his dinner knife into his sleeve as he laughed at one of my dad's jokes. I had a feeling the knife was for me. I had to get away from there. I rushed over to my bike and unlocked the combo. I was at full speed heading down the street within seconds. Behind me, I heard the front door of my house open and shut. I didn't turn back. I pedaled faster, and 10 minutes later, I was pulling up at Lewis's. There, just like me, was Lewis's bike, locked up along the side of the house in the same manner as always. I had a plan to go in and get Lewis. He'd know what to do. Lewis's dad answered the door and invited me in. I noticed it immediately. Lewis was sitting at the table with his family, only he was different. The cleft lip he had, scarred downwards on the right. The Lewis that was sitting at the table had a scar that went left. It was a mirror version of Lewis, and no one from his family could tell. Between him and I could tell how little attention was paid to us. But we had big families. When other Lewis looked up and saw me, he knew I knew. I saw the same brief flash of hatred and anger that took over his face, but it was shoved aside and replaced with a fake smile. I joined them at the table, and Lewis's mom brought me a plate. Outside, I saw a movement in the window. It was me, the other me. He was there. I felt trapped. I had nowhere to go. Then I got an idea. Over the next few minutes, I gradually kneeled over more and more and started rubbing my stomach. I asked if Lewis's dad could drive me home. He agreed. Outside, he walked me to the car. I turned over and saw other me hiding along the siding of the house, just watching. The drive there became increasingly tense as I started to wonder if my family was okay. Who knew what those mirror versions of us would do? But I got home and my family was okay. I kept up with the pretending to be sick charade and went upstairs to lay down. From my bedroom window, I watched other me outside, pacing in the shadows. Soon after, he was joined by other Lewis. I was trying to figure out a plan to make it through the night when something small crashed through my window. It wasn't very loud and nobody came to check up on me, so I guessed everybody downstairs didn't hear. I picked up the projectile, which turned out to be a rock, and found it wrapped in paper. There was a message written on the inside of it. Come out by midnight, or we will come in and kill everybody. It was 9 o'clock at this point, so I had 3 hours to figure it out. I went over the arsenal in the house, which was none. Dad didn't have a gun. Most of his tools were in the garage, and that was not attached to the house. I only had close combat weapons, except there was one thing. Just one. It popped in my mind and stuck. I knew it would work, as a weapon or at least a distraction. I formed a plan. I'd come to the realization that Lewis was dead, killed by other Lewis, and my twin was trying to kill me to replace me for whatever purpose. 2 things were clear. The first was that they wanted me dead. The second was the only way to stop them was to kill them first. With the idea I had, I waited until quarter to midnight before getting my supplies. With my secret weapon hidden inside one of my larger coats, I grabbed 2 knives from the kitchen. I planned to use them, but hoped I wouldn't have to, if I even had it in me to do so. I went to the window and watched the 2 outside. They'd spent most of the night on opposing sides of the house, but would occasionally join each other on one end to talk. They were in the backyard, so I went to the front door and took off down the street. I knew it wouldn't be long before they saw me and started to chase me, but I just need to get 4 blocks to the kids' park nearby, which would be the most empty place in the neighborhood at this time of night. My secret weapon rubbed against my chest, but I kept going. As I passed the halfway point, I turned back to check. They saw me, and they were in full sprint to catch me. I had to beat them though. I had just enough of a head start to turn into the park and find my way to the back courtyard. I ran towards the bathroom shelter and went into the boys' room. I rushed to the far wall and pressed my back against it. I had the 2 knives in my jacket pocket, but it wasn't time for them yet. My left hand moved inside my jacket, holding the handle of my secret weapon. The bathroom door kicked open and the twins burst in. They slowed when they saw me looking like a cornered mouse with nowhere to go. Other me led the way, pulling the dinner knife from his sleeve. Closely over his shoulder, Other Lewis did the same. They moved in on me without a word spoken. My left hand tightened on the handle of my secret weapon and I lifted my right arm, straightening it and pointing my hand at eye level to the attackers. Tapped to the inside of my jacket was our house's fire extinguisher. My left handle held the clasp handle, and the hose looped from my sleeve with the nozzle just exiting out of my cuff. Before the twins could stop, I squeezed the handle and held it down. The stream hit both of them directly in the face, mouth, and eyes. I shifted to the side, continuing to spray, but wanting to keep my location moving. They both went down, clutching at their faces and screaming. But the screams didn't sound like they came from human vocal cords. They were croaky and shrill at the same time. I wanted to move in on them with just the knives I'd brought, but the fire extinguisher had done more than temporarily impair them. The fire extinguisher sputtered out, empty. The smoke that filled the bathroom began to settle. The twins were twitching, spasming out. Green foam was pouring from their mouths. It just kept coming. Their limbs started to stiffen. Then they started changing. Their skin was peeling away from the inside and looked like bark. Strange roots and brambles sprouted from underneath. The human form they once had disappeared as they transformed into something unrecognizable. A frightening and warped series of knots and rotted bark covering lengths of branch. That was what they were underneath it all. I left them as they were. Whoever found a mass of impossible growths in the park bathroom wouldn't be able to tell what they used to be. Hopefully, they end up in a green bin. I never heard more about it. Of course, Fluent went missing, and I knew he'd never be found. It was heartbreaking to deal with, watching his family search for him. I never even knew what happened to his body. Eventually, I grew up. But I never forgot, which is why I bring this up to you now. My son and his best friend go on long bike trips throughout the woods. And when my son returned home this evening, the crooked central incisor on the left side of his upper jaw now is on the right. The end.
This has been Gray Stories. I hope you liked